What is going on? We are here with another episode of the Fueling Fire podcast show, whichever one we want to call it this day. And we are going to talk about some fun things. We're going to talk about 2022 and aims and moving forward in life and how to find positions that are going to give all of us, a better sense of meaning and purpose and value to our life. But if anything looks different, if you're watching on YouTube or wherever, the lighting looks just slightly different. One, we are seating, and two, we are back to producing our own show. We had some aims in 21 with the show, the podcast, that, for both ends, I think everyone came out on the other side smarter and wiser and in better positions for themselves. So anyways, I just wanted to say why our lighting might look a little different than previous shows if you're watching on YouTube. But what to do?
Just enjoying the fourth snowy winter day in a row, yeah. I feel like, which is amazing. We've had really shitty snow lately, so this has been a welcome little surprise. Yes, lots of shoveling. But we are just super excited. I'm super excited to launch something new.
Yeah,
a little different.
We are launching 10 Points Happier.
Mm-hmm. How did you come up with that? If you know Garry at all and you're used to working with him, he is the visionary, and he comes up with ideas at very odd hours. Mm-hmm. And it's like we have them, and then boom, they come to life, which is really cool. So how did this kind of come to fruition, or why'd you start thinking about it?
Well, first of all, when she says weird hours, we were actually at our coach's house, Alex, staying there for our other coach's wedding, Eric. And
Andrew, he's a great host too. We could
not fall asleep one night and came up with this idea 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and then got up and wrote it all down. And most of my ideas,
wake me up first a little bit.
If I'm just being honest, they come from a slightly shifted state of of consciousness. We're always enjoying something that doesn't make me sober at the time. And then I usually have epiphanies. Then I can piece things together.
That it's not like hard drugs.
Yeah. I'm not out there doing acid,
speed and cocaine and all sorts of crazy shit. That's not it.
Yeah, there's usually a little bit of whiskey or White Claws involved. And anyways, but yeah, we are launching 10 Points Happier. And we decided to do this because it fits into something that we already stumbled upon ourselves. It's something that we're already kind of doing unexpectedly pretty well within our all-terrain atmosphere and the athletes that we coach in fitness. Because the way we coach is to make sure that we are taking into account the narrative that's going on in the head, right? What's going on in the mental space. And so with that, and society, where the world is in 2021 and for the foreseeable future, we figured people are struggling with happiness, right? Suicide rates are at the highest they've been in a long time, especially young teenagers. I mean, I saw a crazy stat that, and please correct me if this stat was wrong. I'm sure it was something I was scrolling on, but it was something within the past given time, quarter or whatever or something. There was 7 deaths of COVID and there was 250 suicides, right?
Wow.
It was some stat that just put into perspective that there are, to not take into account this mental side that people are struggling with right now.
The seriousness of it. It's something that can get overlooked. And I think not even within COVID, but even just zooming the lens out a little more, there's a mental health crisis in general.
Yep.
And it's definitely been getting a lot worse with the last almost 2 years of a global pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't kind of trending super high even before that. And I think that's one of the biggest things, and I think you and I realized it in the last probably like 3 months or so, that almost everyone we come in contact with or have a conversation about, in at least 3 minutes of talking to them, somehow it's like, oh yeah, everyone's struggling right now.
Yep.
Or like, yeah, man, like everyone I talk to is just like really down. And it seems like it's almost like super early on in a conversation, and it's been like in every aspect of people we know, really successful people who have just gone through life changes, like no matter who they are. I feel like that's kind of been this like theme. And you and I have kind of like gone home and like, okay,
pondered
everyone is struggling, and we've gone through our own shit too. And that was kind of like, you know, when we made our first program, Finding Fire, it was like a lot of our own personal things, like what has worked for us.
Yeah.
Nutrition wise, training wise, mentality wise. And now I think we've kind of harnessed like the mentality work that we've done ourselves has just like illuminated a whole new world almost. And to be able to give that to people that are really struggling is really important.
Yeah. I mean, the mentality work is what has excelled and expedited all areas that we've wanted to grow in.
Yeah.
Faster than anything else, right? It's always been, life has always moved the best for us and broken through barriers, perceived barriers, when we are working on that mentality and training that mental muscle often. And so I think the big thing came down to is we've just been having a lot of deep conversations as to why we feel like people are struggling with this.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think for me, what I see is our emotional intelligence to how to navigate the modern world hasn't caught up to modern technology and knowledge is my thought.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I think in a day where everything is we have so much information that we can access, we don't ever have to take into account our emotions or like what is the subjective experience going on in our head, right? Like I was talking about this the other day, right? In the past, people were much more conscious of their emotional reactions to things and how things made them feel because they didn't have a very quick definition for that thing. Like if I were looking at, I don't know, let's say I'm looking at, or I want to know a certain number, right, of something. Like I just go and Google, you know, how many people live in the city? 3,000 people. Or what is this tree? Or why is that thing the way it is? Maybe that would be a good, like Google, why is that way, the thing the way it is? You get an answer, and now you just have a definition for it, and you haven't had to navigate. How does it make me feel? Like, should I pay attention to these feelings of anger and fear that are getting me, nagging at me from this factoid that I saw on Instagram?
Right. Well, I think it's the combination of the emotional intelligence, but also critical thinking. And I think that's where it is. There's, you know, an answer to something right away that a lot of times we just don't have to think about anything anymore, which is great. We've made tons of progress. And this is the thing where it's like there's a lot of double-edged swords here of like the digitized age and everywhere we've gone is like amazing. It's phenomenal. But also there's these newer things that we're noticing that we need to start taking into account. One of those being emotional intelligence and how we're going to keep prioritizing that. And then also critical thinking. And I think that also goes into like people blindly following like what they should do with all this information instead of actually taking a second to ingest the information themselves and think critically about what they want, what's rational, everything that way.
So you mean like critical thinking, you mean like looking at the thing
like
and constructively breaking it down?
Yeah, and like problem solving. Like instead of just
saying because
waiting.
We don't have to problem solve as much because we get the answer to
right,
whatever.
because you can just ask someone like how to do it. It's the same thing that like instead of going to look for something Just being like, oh, where is this?
Yeah, like I do all the time.
Yes.
It's efficient. It's fast.
It is. But
It's your superpower.
But it's my superpower because I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I practice it frequently.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things. I think it's just emotional intelligence and super important, but I think we also have to combine that with critical thinking. And it's when the two of those come together, when we can think and be in alignment with positive emotions, that's where the fulfillment and the growth is going to come from.
Yeah.
We may, have like positive affect and feel emotionally good. But then we kind of take that like growth and progress out. So is it really true happiness? And then I feel like when one of those things is missing, true fulfillment isn't really there. So it has to be both.
Okay. So we at least both agree that because of the modern day, we have lost a lot of our capability to navigate our own inner self in a way that is producing happiness. Okay. Which, I think leads into what we're talking about in this first thing for this new year, this new podcast. 2022 is, we call it AIM, and we'll kind of talk about AIM. Another word for it could be goal, right? Everyone has these new goals, and we want to, I think in this new age, like we talk about, it's hard to figure out where to put your value, your sense of value, what place to weight things. And I'll use a counter example is like we see a lot of people currently like denigrating down into these like tribes of us versus them, right? And I'm just going to be blunt. Like let's say one obviously big one is not vax, right? You have vaxxers who feel like you're putting everyone else at risk, and you have anti-vaxxers who feel like their freedom is in question, right? And so now both parties you're hindering that other person's capability to lead a life of happiness and bliss, right? So we kind of denigrate into like,
are you bringing into like all these things are turning into like moral judgments? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and like we're weighting a lot of our value in certain things, or how we talk about these things or present ourselves, right? Versus like having conversations of like, hey, the world's shit right now. How can we go and make everyone's life better, right? Yeah. Instead of like pointing fingers, where a lot of us, instead we're caught up pointing fingers instead of us having roundtable conversations of like, hey, how can we go and solve this problem, right? And put value in helping out somebody else's life better with this thing. Well,
and that's as we go through the entire program of 10 Points Happier, that's one of the things that we'll touch on in a couple weeks is getting away from this is the problem, I need to fix it, new problem, I need to fix it, new fire, I need to put it out, like where we're just so tunnel visioned on what's happening.
And we're caught up in our expectations.
Yeah. And then we can actually like lift our head up and get more of that bird's eye view with that intent to connect to other people, to actually create some sort of positive impact, whether that's in your community, in the world, wherever. And I think it's really getting out of that problem solution to that grander aim and having that intent to really help other people. And that's what we're going to go through in 10 Points Happier and throughout the next 12 weeks. There's going to be really specific things to kind of hit on, but that's definitely going to be a really big one, is straying away from just solving every problem and being able to have an outcome.
So as we go to find aims in this new year, I think a big emphasis of our program and what we're doing in 10 Points Happier is to really help all of us get to a deeper sense of like, why is this aim important to me? What's the emotional value I stand to gain from this, experience? And we'll kind of, we'll use the little example of like, when you set out on a goal, like so many of them are very surface level, right? But you never, let's say you want to have more money, right? You want to get financial freedom, right? You never just want to gain money to put it in a pile and look at it, right? Or you never gain, you want to get a healthier body because you just want to look at it in a mirror to yourself, right? There's this experience you expect to gain from accomplishing that thing that should bring more sense of meaning and value to your life, right?
Right. Well, and that's literally part of being a human being, is being like having that connection to the people around you. How you're perceived by other people is, you know, important from the evolutionary stance. And so there's kind of all of these mental signals that, kind of like we're saying, have just been like hyper focused with the digital age and progress now, that are actually really, really helpful. But we need to kind of go back to the root. And in order to do that, we ask ourselves the question, why? So it's like we can kind of, it can help us align what our aim might be if we kind of start with like, oh, maybe the first thing that comes up off the top of my head is I want more money. And then that's when you come in and you just rip people apart. Not rip people apart, but you turn into like the 3-year-old. But that's what we're trying to get down into, is like, well, where's the root cause there? Because 99.9% of the time it's something a lot deeper.
And because we never actually have the conversation, right? We don't write it out. We don't talk it out half the time. Many of us, like, we think we have a fully formulated thought, but we actually really don't, right? A lot of times we think about something that we want, we experience an emotion, and we feel like we have this kind of formulated thought as to why we might want that thing, but we don't necessarily always realize, like, oh, I want to get healthier not only because it'll make me feel more confident, I want to get healthier because it's going to allow me to have more time for my kids. And why do I want to have more time with my kids? Oh, because I realized that I really hated how short of time I had with my parents because they died young because of their lack of health, right?
Right.
And the unfortunate reality as humans is we are always running from a fear and trying to run towards a desire, right? And so we don't necessarily always formulate all the levels, right? Like, what am I running towards, right? Maybe I want to gain more money. Why do I want to gain more money? Well, because then I could travel. Well, why do you want to travel more? Well, if I can travel more, then I'll get a bigger sense of experience and culture and learning. And, you know, maybe I want to do that because I grew up in a small town where nobody ever wanted to travel and I hated that, right?
Yeah. Or maybe you want to be challenged by different cultures and viewpoints and actually see, like, and we've had, you know, friends do that. They've lived in a different area and it's just like opened up a whole box. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I want to widen my mental horizons. And that's also why travel is super important to me. Yeah.
And then, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's like once we fully kind of formulate, like, you know, what are we running away from and what are we running towards? It gives it a stronger emotional attachment to the thing, right? And just like any strong memory of our life, right, it's strapped to a very high emotion, right?
Yes.
And so when we can,
good or bad,
and so when we can really start to create stronger emotions and feelings towards this place that you want to go, right, it starts to become like a bigger, stronger pulling magnet, right? Becomes a little bit more just of like a glancing thought that kind of flitters into your brain every once in a while when you have a conversation with the spouse about money, or when you are looking in the mirror and you don't feel good in your jeans, right? It becomes more, instead of just like a fleeting thought that comes in every so often when you see it or hear it, it becomes more of like a constant focus when you realize, wow, this is where I want to go and why I want to get there. And then you start to make things happen.
Well, and the reason we do it this way is, you know, going through a designed program, writing out these things, discussing them with other people, that allows you to actually formulate that thought fully. I think, and you quoted The Matrix, which I'm going to re-quote it for you, but what were you going to say?
I was going to say, well, that I definitely have heard from like Jordan Peterson, but The Matrix threw it in there.
Okay. Whoever it was, but the difference of knowing the path and walking the path.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing where like someone can say something, you listen to something in a podcast, a speech, a movie, and you're like, oh, I really resonate with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot harder for you to put that same thing into words.
Yeah.
It's like that thought isn't super fully formulated in your mind. Same thing with goals, vision, intent. You can like have these swirling thoughts, but if you don't take the practice to verbally or written, like get them out and start to like edit them and scratch them out so they make sense, it's not something that you're going to consciously make action on. And it's the same thing as like when you buy a new car, you see that car everywhere.
Yep.
So it's like once I say this aim out loud or write it down, like there's actually conscious attention being driven to it. It's not just like this fleeting thought I had once.
Mm-hmm. And having that conversation gets you out of that ignorance is bliss state. A lot of people, you know, they know, like, I know I want to be healthier. I know I want to do this, but like, why do we not? Because it's just, it's nice to not have that fully formulated, and live in a blissful state that you don't have to actually know what are your deepest fears about what happens if you don't fix this. And you also don't have to hold yourself accountable to realizing you're not living your best life and taking the action to get there if it's not fully formulated. So that's why, you know, this aim, you know, an activity that you can do, whether you're in 10 points happy or not, is writing out your goal and then writing down why 3 times below and expanding upon that. So like, I want to lose weight. Well, why do you want to lose weight? Well, if I lose weight, I'm going to feel, you know, I'm going to maybe get lower blood pressure and off some cholesterol medicine. Well, why do you want to get off of blood pressure and cholesterol medicine? Well, they don't make me feel good. And I also am worried about like dying early. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like why
you not want to die, or why do you not want to die early?
Die early, right? So then the third one is like, well, I don't want to die early because I have a lot of good shit to live for.
Mm-hmm. Or another one that I feel like comes up a lot is like, I don't want to put that burden on my family.
Mm-hmm. I saw my mom have to be taken care of because she couldn't take care of herself. Mm-hmm. And I don't want that to happen to my kids. I don't want them to have to take care of me the way that happened or see that, right?
Right.
I don't want to be a burden to my family. So it's until you ask yourselves those whys and you really distill down why you want to go to this place, why the burden and responsibility of taking continuous action to getting to this place is worth it, you kind of just sit there in the ignorance is bliss type thing. Like, it's a pile of bills that's piling up in the corner. You know it's there, but you pleasantly ignore it because it's not defined.
I think also the why gets it to a point where, again, this brings it back to like critical thinking and actually thinking about what you want and what is important to you. A lot of times if people have this aim, and it's happened to me as well, and I'm sure you too, if you can't ask yourself those 3 questions and answer them, do you really want it?
Yeah.
Like, have you ever found yourself in that situation?
It's almost like a weighting system.
Yeah, where it's like
weighting actual weight of volumes. Like, is this deep enough?
Yeah.
If you can't even
where it's
answer
kind of
that
like,
3 times.
No, I guess it's not really.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. It's like, okay, great. Like, that wasn't it. So let me try with something else. And it could just be something slightly different. And just ensuring that you get to those 3 why. And that's something that, you're going to actually place value in.
Yep.
Because if you can't get there, then, again, it could be something totally fine for someone else, but you don't need to choose someone else's aims and visions and goals.
And if you can't answer those 3 questions, right, it's not going to, that why is definitely not going to be strong enough for you to once you run into the inevitable obstacle that's going to happen, have the fortitude to press beyond it.
Right.
And so that's, you know, finding the aim we think is bigger than a goal, right? Like, aim is just one way that we feel like it's something that's bigger, and it also is something that can move, right? Like, you know, let's say you're using a gun, right?
I was going to think you're going to bring it into
archery. You can have one focal, archery. You can have guns a little easier for most people, right? You have an aim on a certain target for a little while, and that thing can change. And it will throughout life, like it should. Like, aims are not meant to be stationary. And we'll kind of talk about the difference between an aim and your life's intent and how those things differ. But again, it has to be weighted enough. You have to be able to dig it apart to really, when the inevitable chaos happens, to keep walking through, right? So with aim, it can move, it's going to move, but it always needs to be something that has a lot of weight to it that is going to make your life a lot better. It's going to take you away from your fears, and it's going to take you to your desires. And so I think we kind of want to just, and if you think this is a good next spot to go to, we kind of wanted to talk about where aims lie and why aims lie in the big three. Do we want to go there now?
Yeah, kind of like how we can categorize them.
Yeah. So, obviously, most aims fall within wealth, health, or relationships. And, we think that an important part to an aim should be something that gets you out of a wanting phase or feeling of a needing phase. Or if you think of that specific area of your life, it brings up negative feelings, right? Like you think of like maybe your wealth. Maybe this year is your goal is your wealth, but in the past your wealth has been associated with, you think of it and you're like, you feel feelings of guilt, like, oh, I'm not going to be able to pay for my kids' college, or oh, I'm not going to be able to retire on time, or oh, I'm not going to be able to travel the way I want to travel, right?
Instead of like, oh, I'm kind of scared to get there.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah. We want it to be, aims solve those things that taking us away from, at least from wanting or feeling like we need, right? Like,
so that kind of takes the desire. We don't want to be running towards the desire. And is that what you're saying? An aim, or another way is like our goal in 10 Points Happier is with aims is to let's make sure in these three categories that we're not in a spot that is associated with negative feelings. Okay. Does that make sense? Yep. That makes more sense. Okay. I was just trying to clear that up.
No, for sure. Because we believe only truly when you have these things that can be so consuming in our mind, do you even have bandwidth to then go and spread impact elsewhere, right? When you're, an easy one is obviously wealth, right? Like if you can't pay your own bills, you have a lot less capacity to go and help others. Or if it involves your health, right? Like if you struggle to get up and down from the recliner, how can you go and, work at a local charity or something like that, right? The wealth one's easier to picture. But we're like relationships.
Health is too.
And relationships too. Like when you feel like you're missing something in a relationships not going well, or you don't have that significant other, right? It can be very weighted. Like if it makes you feel, if you're alone, it's tough to feel alone and be happy and in a place of where you also feel satisfied there. People. And you want to go and help other people, right?
Right.
You still have this big, even if you are, not saying that you can't.
Right.
You still have this big brain ninja getting into your brain like all the time, right? Like in the moment where you're trying to create bliss by helping others, right? There's probably still that thing in the back of your mind, like I don't have anyone to share this moment with.
And I think it's important also that like in the word relationships also, it's like this doesn't need to be a significant other. We're also talking about like relationships with like you and other human beings. How are your friendships with your family, like all of those as well. And I think we also kind of break it down into health, wealth, relationships too, because that's where you think of like where the most stress, like chronic stress that all of us feel usually comes from one of those three places. Like if there's tons of stress with not being able to pay your bills, and having that like weighted fear on you all the time. If there's tons of stress with your health, like that's literally life or death. And then your relationships, just like you were saying, and like I was saying earlier, like part of the human experience is connecting with other people. Like that's built into who we are. And so when that's why we kind of break them into those three, because it's like we notice that they can be filled with a lot of those fear-based, stressful emotions. And we're trying to create an aim where we can choose positivity and spread impact to others along those and kind of take out those negative feelings because they're so important.
Exactly. And so if we can kind of solve those things, right, then we get into a happier state, right? That's one way to produce more happiness. There's other ways for sure, but it's like, you know, I hate to say it, like if you're not in alignment, kind of your big three, like you're probably not living your best fulfilled life. These seem to be an integral part of the human experience that people have tried to always try to rectify for forever. And it's always going to be, there's going to be something new, right? But we can try to get to a spot that, like, when we have momentum on our side with that thing, we can propel forward faster, and we can also prepare ourselves for the inevitable chaos that's going to ensue.
Right.
And so we don't slip down as far, right? And I think, like, one thing is for our relationship, you know, we are currently doing a lot of work right now with therapists, a couples therapist, before we get married, before we have kids, because we know there will be chaos in the future, right? Right. There will be unforeseen things where we will be so strapped to solving the problems in the moment right now with the kids that we won't have as much time to take into the emotional inventory of, like, what's going on. But if we can do the work now, right, we can navigate that easier, right? We can go into that phase understanding each other a little bit better, understanding our emotional responses to things. And that way, when we do inevitably get into chaos, we're not going to slip down as far as we would if we didn't have the emotional intelligence that we're gaining now from doing these things with each other.
Right. And I mean, one of the things that we'll dive deeper into in a couple weeks as well is expectations, and it's knowing and expecting that, like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in any aspect. But, like, say, you know, talking about a relationship as well, marriage, raising kids, like, it's all really fulfilling and beautiful and really important. We hold a lot of value in that, but we also expect that it's going to be hard as shit. And if you don't have that expectation, if you're assuming that it's going to be this, like, just amazing thing, we're going to get married, we're never going to argue, we're going to have the best family, you know, all these things. It's like, well, inevitably when that doesn't happen, just like you were saying, that dip in that dark place, you're probably going to stay down there for a really long time because you weren't prepared. Like, you didn't do the preparation. And I think that's one of the things that we both value a lot, is that doing these mentality practices are really kind of like diving into the world of being happier or being more fulfilled and growing together. Doesn't mean that we don't necessarily like where we're at now. It's that we're looking for progress and growth, knowing that, like, that's going to prepare us for the times that are bad. We don't need to wait for the bad times to then start to do the work.
100%.
It's going to be a lot harder to claw our way out.
Yeah. And a more, like, relatable current example is, like, you know, you just became full-time in June. Yep. And we struggled a lot more with us working in the same house together, on the same business. It was really more or less the working on the same business, not even not even, well, it was almost like that. Yeah, that was, we've done that in the past. That's easy.
Yeah, that was the bigger piece. And then when it made it working in the same house seem like more of the problem. Yeah. Because there was, like, zero disconnect.
Yeah. And you would think, like, oh, it sounds cool to all be, you know, I feel like a lot of people, excited, we still are, we still love it. But I feel like a lot of people, you know, they tell us, like, oh my gosh, you guys work on the same, how cool is that? And it's like, well,
it's hard.
It's not as easy as you think it would be.
I do love you, but it's hard.
Yeah. And it takes us having these common aims, these common values together, to, you know, have the aims with the finances in the business, to have the aims with the culture of our business, to have the aims of our relationship outside the business, right? It takes continuous effort and action and weeding, seeding, and feeding to keep going to a new place where we can get back to a place of cohesiveness, right? Right. And when we have those really strong whys, the really strong aims between us together as a couple in our business, right, it makes it, when we run into those obstacles, we're willing to bear the burden and responsibility of, hey, we got to dive deep into this. Like, we got to fucking dissect it. Like, there's tension between us. So instead of sweeping it under the rug and letting the dragon grow bigger and bigger, like, we need to extract this now. And we need to figure out why. Like, we're struggling and meeting each other's expectations as we're going towards this aim. We're clashing heads. let's dissect this, because if we don't dissect this, we're not going to hit our aims, right? When we're out of that emotional alignment, and we'll talk about that in the future, and I don't want to get too far, we won't get to that aim, because we'll get sidetracked because we're stuck in a shitty place emotionally, and we'll break those emotions down later. But with the aim, right? So, regardless of if you're conscious of your aim or not, we're always in our head formulating ideas of where we would like to be, what would potentially be better based off of the current data we have of our past, the experiences that we've had, and where we're currently at, right?
Right.
And it's like, unless your brain's always looking at that, and so unless you consistently weed, feed, and seed, right, you can sit there in just a lot of resentment, right?
Yeah.
You can sit there and resent
anger
towards your family and your kids because you're not feeling like you are moving towards a certain place. You don't feel like you're moving towards that aim, and
you feel out of control
because and even if you haven't defined what I was trying to say, I lost my train of thought, is that like if you don't define it and act on it, your subconscious is still looking at that.
Yes. You
might not have fully formulated thoughts, but you'll randomly act angry or irritable to a certain something because it presented this emotion, and it's part of this subconscious of your brain is always looking to what's, the new aim. How do we move forward? It's our subconscious, and I don't want to get too far down the nitty gritty, but like we have our conscious part of the brain, right? But we have lower level parts of our brain that are always looking for what's the next thing that we could be doing, right? Like building a shelter, right? This thing is instinctual in us because it is designed to keep us alive, right?
Right.
Like winter's coming. Okay, I collected food. All right, do I have enough food? Maybe not. Where's the shelter? Maybe I should insulate the shelter a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right? You get that done. Well, what's the next thing that's going to help me?
Or it's not like, we made it through one winter. We're good.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, shit. What can I do to make next winter not as shitty?
Yeah, exactly. Right? So these parts are always working for us to keep us alive. But now we live in a world where we aren't always living in Maslow's hierarchy of needs of food, water, shelter, right? And so those things are still going, but we're not sure where to place them. Like we talked about earlier, we're not sure where to place them because of the modern world, because of technology, because everything can be answered immediately. You can pay somebody to do something, and you're not worrying about collecting food and stuff like that. So we have to figure out, we have to realize that we are always doing this regardless. So it's better to define it to yourself, define it to the people around you. And then that way you can get clear on like, okay, I want to keep taking action on this thing because it's going to make me feel better. Or not, you're going to have a blow up. You're going to have a blow up that you just, one day you woke up and your life's not where it was, where you wanted it to be. Your relationship's not where you want it to be. Right. And you're freaking the fuck out because you just let all these little dragons keep building and building because you didn't dissect them. What's a good aim to solve this thing? Keep moving forward, and you let it blow up. Right.
Well, and I think all of us can attest, and I remember you and I had like got into this argument probably like 3 years ago now, but of this, like you can feel when people are in that state of mind too, like when they're caught in like anger and annoyance. And I like vividly remember sitting in the car.
What argument this is.
I don't even know if you'd really consider it an argument, but like I was being like brooding over something and was moody about, and I think all of us can picture like when you felt like that, which is like when you're in that annoyed, frustrated state and you're like also very aware of it and also very annoyed that you feel that way, but not really like having the self-awareness of like, why am I feeling this way, which is also kind of what we're going to dive deeper into at 10 Points Happier. But you were like so frustrated that now I like stole your like excitement and happiness for whatever we were doing. You're like, well, now I'm in a bad mood. Yeah. It's like, well, why is it my fault that I was in a bad mood and now you're in a bad mood and now we're both pissed about something
pissed
stupid.
At my Cheerios.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where it's like when we feel like we are in a more positive place, we literally just like give off that, you can call it energy or vibe, whatever you want to say, and people pick up on it, and then they go spread that to someone else, and then they go spread that to someone else. And so it's like bringing it back to at the beginning, why did we want to create 10 Points Happier? people are struggling and people are mad and angry and sad and frustrated and all of these things.
And they don't know why.
Yeah. And if we can just literally the only place that we can start with and control is within ourselves. And we have to start there. We can do all of these other amazing things to impact the world, but we have to start here if we literally want it to like seep into who we surround ourselves with.
I mean, that's a great point. Of like, people are just, what did you say? Angry, mad, frustrated,
resentful, just like confused.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know if this is necessarily anyone in our, who's doing 10 Points Happier, but, you know, the nihilistic view of the world, right? The whole mentality of the world is in this, caught up in the negative, right? Of everything that's just terrible about the world and everything that humans have done wrong. And, you know,
that's what sells.
F life, because it's going to hell in a handbasket anyways, right?
Yeah. Kind of like, why try?
Yeah.
It's already going to shit.
And so many people are caught up into these big global ideas that you really, it's like when you think of yourself as an individual, it's like, you know, you think you have the capability to do anything with global warming when your health is, you're strapped to medication. Your financials are way out of, you can't even support your own self, right? So it's like, how can we, you know, a lot of people get caught up into these things before they've even, and why are they caught up into them, should I say, is because we don't have we're not happy in our own selves and our lives and our world, our immediate world, right? So we can put it into this, but it's like, hey, the real reason is like everyone's so angry is because we haven't been challenged to critically think and dissect our emotional responses to things, and in our relationships and our wealth and our health, and dissect them apart and be like, okay, what's the best next step to make this thing better? Why is this thing angering me? Why is it irritating me? Why is it making me feeling frustrations, anxiety, and fear? Yeah. Dissecting that, and then dissecting it down with the why. All right, this is my next best step right here. What are the actions I have to take to continually make this thing better? And we don't do that, so we run around frustrated because, again, we're experiencing these things and we haven't been in such a place where we have to actually define them and write them down, right? Like the Stoics and people and religious texts, like a lot of it was these people who didn't have an answer for anything. And they would have these strong emotional responses, like, why did this storm happen, right? That ravaged our whole tribe. And they write down the emotions, and it allows them to dissect that feeling a lot more and expand upon the feeling. And so obviously, like, you know, they would maybe say like the gods were angry at us or something like that. And maybe that's not correct, but because they still knew how to address those emotions a little bit more stoically, a little bit more calm and decisive, because that's the only thing they had. They didn't have the Google to be like, this thing happened. Why did it happen? Right? They're just like, my emotions went crazy.
Well, it's I feel like right now, or at least kind of in the more modern aspect, it's almost thinking of like boredom. Like if we look back at what the Stoics were doing or all these other people, like they didn't have Netflix, they don't have any of these things to entertain themselves. So when this question arises, it's also like, what the fuck else am I going to do all day? Like, I should think about things, because otherwise I'm going to be bored as shit. And I don't know if you guys have
they had
ever
they had a lot more quiet time, right?
Right.
They had a lot more, you know, when the sun went out, they lit a candle.
Yeah. Know? And I mean, that can go into like stimulation and all sorts of things. We don't need to get super down into the rabbit hole now. But I think it's also like, just bring it into, if you've ever worked with children, or if you're a parent, or if children are in your life at all, like, if you have ever been around a bored child or teenager, they are like horrible to be around, because it's just like, it like brings up all of these negative emotions. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, how can we bring in critical thinking and emotional intelligence and give people the tools to think again, the tools to problem solve, the tools to be creative, and think for ourselves. And
the reason we say it is because this is what we've been working on ourselves for
sure,
multiple years.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been I like, we were talking about this the other day. It's like something that's, I've been always trying to problem solve myself from my 18s and 19s, right? And, being in the lifting fitness world, it was very much like listening to Arnold, right? And talk about having a goal and a vision and like, and really getting really clear on why you want to get there. He talked about like, if somebody came up, I want to be the best body in the world, because if I could do that, it would make me feel better. And Arnold would be like, he's like, no, if you don't have the mentality that you are going to do whatever it takes, rain or shine, whatever, like you're not going to make it here. Right. But it was me still yearning for how do I create a name that is going to give me a strong sense of purpose, right? And when in my 18s and 19s, I was much angrier. I didn't know why. I just reacted to everything so angry, and I realized because, I wasn't being fulfilled in these spots.
Yeah.
I wasn't accomplishing the things that I wanted to, but I didn't know what they were, right? Like I just knew I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I didn't have a clear path of where I wanted to go. Yeah. Right. And so I just was angry all the time. Why am I angry? And it's like, okay, I don't have a clear fucking direction. Right. My direction was based off of what everyone else told me to do. And so this is something I've been working on for, I don't know, 13 years, maybe because I'm a little crazy, but
no, I think everyone right now can resonate. Like we all have these things from childhood or the way we grew up. Like for you, I feel like kind of your big thing that you've been overcoming forever is anger. Yeah. And there's probably a ton of other people who definitely resonate with that. For me, I feel like it's the constant overcoming of anxiety. And I'm sure a ton of people can resonate with that. And everyone kind of has their thread that has been going for a while. Whether or not you've tried to pull it or uncover it, I mean, maybe you have started to do the work, maybe you haven't, and this is something super new for you. But we all have shit. And
we're all taught to just be like, how many times have people said like, oh, I'm just an angry person, right? Like, oh, it runs in the family.
I was just going to say, like, when you didn't know how to get out of anger, it was like part of me, I feel like for so long, it was like, well, I'm an anxious person. Yeah. Like, I'm just anxious. Yeah. It's like, okay. Like, I'm still the same person I was 10 years ago. And this is why it's always like not new year, new me. It's like, how can we build the best version of ourselves? We're still who we are.
If you take like a behavioral test, right, you rank high on neuroticism, which is you have a natural inclination to gravitate towards fear-based thoughts, right? But
well, it's super interesting that you did too.
Yeah, but not as high. And for sure, I not to say like, I don't, on the mic, that'll probably come across weird. That's not how I wanted to
I'm
sound.
more neurotic. It's okay. I will own that.
But so you have a more natural tendency to gravitate towards these fear-based emotions. Right. But for the longest time, like you said, you just covered it up and like, oh, I'm just anxious. It's like, well, we can dissect a little bit, like, what are these things that are making me more anxious? Like, oh, it's this feeling of not being where I want to be. It's this feeling of not having the abundance that I want to have. Yeah. Right.
And I think a lot of that was like, I wasn't even aware that in all of these different aspects. And when we break it down into like health, wealth, relationships, it's almost like I was so caught in like, I'm anxious because I'm anxious of like bad thing. Like I'm anxious of getting kidnapped. Yeah. Like it was very much to like, I'm anxious of there's like bad people in the world and they scare me. And then it really wasn't until I like started to do that work that I'm like, oh, holy shit. Like these anxious thoughts are showing up everywhere. And I'm like, and there's definitely things I can do about them. And that made me feel really empowered. Yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, it's scary, but at the same time, like we have the power to change those things. Yep. Or at least have the power to make it a little bit better.
We have 110% power to change our brain, our mental landscape, improve. Yes, we all have we're going to gravitate towards more tendencies. Right. But we can become more aware of the cue craving, reward mechanism, not even cue craving reward, but like what are these things that cue and then have these emotions happen, right? We become more aware of those triggers, right?
Right.
And I mean, it's like if you can train your brain 100%. I mean, think about just how the most simplest way to think of it is like Pavlov's dogs, right? The bell, they hearing the bell and they start to salivate. Like that is training the brain, conditioning that brain to that response. And we still have that same thing to experiences, right? We're conditioned to, when somebody talks to us, like our parents or something like that, or our spouse, we start to condition new associations and feelings to those experiences.
But I think almost we're trying to get away from like this conditioning thing and have it be that internal drive. And that's, something that I feel super passionately about children too, is like, always striving for this reward. And I think we were talking to someone the other day of like, and maybe this is someone who's listening, like always kind of looking for the next thing, or shiny object syndrome, all these things. Like we're looking for that big hit, or like positive feedback, all these things. And it's like, in and of itself, that's not bad, but how do we also couple that with the internal drive so that when those things don't happen, it's not like I'm a horrible person and we go down all of these paths. Like how can we, like, yeah, positivity and those rewards and stuff are great, but how can we also build that internal compass,
how
and
can
internal
we
drive,
like when the initial,
for when they're not there,
for like when you're setting a new aim and you have this initial optimism and excitement about it and you feel on fire for life, when that inevitably fades, how do you keep having that intrinsic motivation to keep working on the things, right? Is that what you're saying? Or
like in that, I mean, we've talked about it before of like the absence of motivation, like when those things aren't there, we still need something, and that has to come from within.
Comes with the aim, comes with the why.
And so that's the whole point, where it's like, and you have to work for it. It's not just like something that all of a sudden just like is going to appear, dust it off for you.
And you need to get doggishly clear with yourself of where do you need to go with your life, and that's going to make this better. Like, what do you need to extract and remove from the solution that is hindering your life, hindering your relationship? What's the elephant in the room that you are letting go unaddressed? Whether you even know what it tangibly is, or you're subconsciously going through life and you don't know what it is, right? But your brain is formulating, like, again, like I said, when I was angry for what felt like a no apparent reason, but when I really realized, it's like, oh, it's because I'm, no offense to where I used to live, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. I didn't feel like it was going to take me to meeting you.
Good job, babe. You're like, oh, I just saw an opportunity. Boom. I'm going for it.
Yeah, good one.
You earned 2 points.
This is on record too. 3 cameras recording right now, so I'm a good fiance.
Today. Just kidding.
And so again, you just have to get doggishly clear, and a lot of us live in a cloud of what it is that would make address this thing, make it better, so we can get out of these fear-based, anger-based emotions, and get to a place of feeling happy and at ease. And once we can do that and we can extract those emotions, we can start to have more capacity to show up better for others and people we don't even know, right? To our community.
And that's the goal.
And that is the goal. And one more thing I wanted to add to that. Extract. Hey, I hit the record. Oh, there we are. We're back.
Were we just black for a while?
Yeah. Was there anything? What we were saying? You gotta dissect it, address it. I remember. And once you do, and we'll talk about this later in 10 Points Happier. But man, nothing has been more freeing for me, of knowing, like, just being aware of when my natural tendencies for like fear and scarcity, anxiety are creeping in, and just knowing that it's like, it's an emotional response, and like all I have to do is just let it fade. Like I'm going to go for a walk, right? Like, a lot of, and then let me paint an example of why. Like, so for our business in the first year, And it was like this in my first business. First year or two, you're always feeling like it's gonna fucking implode tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like you're making some progress, but you're like,
sudden,
you just have dreams. Like you're gonna wake up, everyone's gonna hate you. Everyone left you.
It's like the first day of school
you
dream,
failed.
but business version.
Exactly. And as of late, you know, man, if I had this tool earlier on of like recognizing when these things are happening, and it's like, all right, you're having this an emotional response. It's fear and scarcity and anxiety about the future. Like, why are you trying to act on this right now when it's at the emotional peak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. So like not making your point of action from that peak.
Yeah. And not just like reacting to it. Like, here's this fear, react like out of scarcity. It's like, okay, why is this feeling happening?
Mm-hmm.
Sit with it for a second. Like, why am I getting fear? Okay, I'm getting this fear because this thing happened, defining it. Well, now how can I rectify that? Currently, okay, now I have a plan of rectifying, and how can I prevent this going forward, right?
Yeah.
And when you allow yourself to step away instead of acting like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I got to figure this out right now. Oh my God, everything's going to die, right? When
I've never sounded like that before.
When you realize that these emotions can fade, like they hit you high, and a lot of people want to do now. If you just sit there, take 5 minutes to go breathe, right? Go walk the dogs, go work out. Like everything's going to probably be okay. You're probably not going to die. You're probably, you know, if obviously you are going to die, you need to act on that now. But if you're not, like, it's like you're going to have, it's much better, and you're going to produce 10 times better results when you take a second to step back and reflect. Why am I in this fear-based state? What are the logical solutions to get out of this as efficiently as possible so you can take that emotion out of it? And then how can I prevent this in the future?
Well, yeah, your brain literally cannot process information when you're in that state. So it's like...
But how many times have you and I done that? Like, we've been in that fear-based state, and we react to it right then.
Mm-hmm. And I think everyone can probably, like, pinpoint one moment where you've done that, and then you really regret how that went.
Yeah.
When you're like, and fuck, that sucked.
I just made an ass of myself because I was so angry, and I reacted out of the anger.
Yeah, or it's like, I'm thinking, like, on my end with the, like, anxious, and you hit it like nail on the head of like, I have to do this right now. And then it's like 10 minutes later, I think of a way better idea. And I'm like, if I just would have thought of that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't thinking. I was just
reacting,
like, oh, I got to do.
Reacting. Like you are reacting like a basketball game.
Yes.
And a ball comes your way.
Yeah.
This
where it's like, no,
emotion
there is time to
Let me
think.
just try to instinctively react and not deconstruct the problem.
Right. And can that happen 1,000% of the time? Absolutely not.
No.
But being able to note when you do have the time and actually seeing the difference, and I think that's what you're talking about, is like really seeing the difference that makes.
Yeah.
Like, just makes you prioritize it and appreciate it, and value that like true decision making. Yeah.
Well, because if you really like think about it, you're like, okay, this is my lower level fight, flight, or freeze brain, hijacking my conscious capability to critically think my way through this problem. When you recognize, all right, lower brain, get your shit out of the way, let it go, let the adrenaline subside. Yeah. Right. And then starting to critically think, like, why did I get here? Why did that happen? How can I prevent this? How can I rectify this, and how can I prevent this in the future? Like, what behaviors did I do that fucked me? Yeah. And got me to this point? And
I think that third piece is super important, and we'll dive really deep into that in 10 Points Happier, but really that prevention piece at the end, that it's like, that's what's going to get us out of a lot of futuristic problems.
Yep, for sure.
But we don't really need to go super deep into that
one. We just wanted to make sure we're covering most of the things that we wanted to cover.
I think, I have one thing that I know we wanted to touch on that I don't know if we were super clear. But I think one of the things that we wanted to get across was when you're coming up with your aim, finding something that isn't going to bring up these negative emotions, but it's okay to be scared of it. Like, it's okay if it provokes this, like, oh shit.
Yeah. Well, we typically wanted to.
Oh shit excitement, not oh shit, like, there's no way I can ever do this. just kind of taking those two emotions into account, where like it doesn't have to be something that provokes no fear or emotion. Like that's also not what we're going for, but not something that's just going to give you like all these feelings of inadequacy. And maybe you can kind of pick that apart a little more. I didn't really explain that very well, but
no, I know exactly what you're trying to iterate. Aims, I think this kind of comes more to like changing your environment versus like you're in something like a relationship that you just want to like improve.
Okay.
But regardless, typically an appropriate aim should scare you.
Yes.
It should give you feelings of nervousness. It should should make you doubt yourself of your capabilities of getting there.
Right.
Because most often that's on the reason you're having those feelings is because your instinct knows that like, but if I could get to the other side.
Yeah. Well, it's uncomfortable.
If I could get to the other side, this would dramatically improve my life. This would dramatically make everything better. Right? You wouldn't even understand why you are fearful if you didn't also have a comprehension of why this place is going to make your life better.
Right.
It's the weight of that thing, of that place, and the potential failure of not getting there that makes you scared. Now,
the difference I want to highlight, and maybe you can explain that side, like that's the fear we're looking for when we're coming up with a name. What are the negative emotions we are trying to avoid while coming up with a name? Because we kind of hinted on that earlier in this episode of like when you immediately think about it, like I think you brought it up with wealth. Like if it's just like immediate super negative emotions, like how is that different than that fear you were just talking about that we are looking for?
Yeah, I think that is you have there's a difference between having fear that the tax man's coming and you haven't addressed it and you're not doing that thing that you should be doing versus like I'm gonna go all in on this and I might fail, right?
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense to me.
I think there's a big difference between, again, like not addressing what the dragon, the elephant that's growing, right? The dragon that's under your bed and it's growing. It's this thing that you are kind of aware. You kind of get a glancing emotional negative feeling towards it when you think about it or you see it or you hear it, right? But you don't address it and it continues to grow and grow and grow, right? Like that's the thing that we want to extract. And how do we extract it? We identify like what it is and what do I need to do? What would make this seemingly better? And now what are the actions that I need to keep taking to get there? And the fear that we do want is that you're nervous of the obstacles that are going to come from going to that.
That's a good way of saying it. You're scared of the bumps in the road that are going to come up. Okay.
Because it inevitably does, right? And we're going to talk about this in the 5 phases of growth.
Well, that's usually what it is. You're not scared of getting there. You're scared of what the fuck you have to do to get there.
Yep. And so, for us with our aim, our goal is to address what are our desires, where do we want to go to, what are we running away from, right? But a lot of people have that obstacle of fear of the what ifs that they need help extracting, right? And we're, in our program, I don't think we're in, are we talking about on week 2? Sorry, crew.
Go down a little further.
Yes, we're doing it next week. So we'll talk about that more.
Okay.
But so next week we're going to address,
I'm super excited for week 2 personally.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So right now we're addressing, right? What are we running to that's going to make our life better? Defining it, because we need to define it, because if not, our subconscious is defining it for us, but we just don't know what it is.
Yep.
And then also define what are we running away from, right? Because a lot of us don't necessarily know. We haven't fully formulated like, holy shit, I'm running away from this because this happened to me in my fucking life because of my parents and it fucking sucked, right? Like a lot of us just go living our life without defining what that is.
Yeah.
And then, but the problem is that once we do get there, that we can be presented with obstacles of fear. Fears of what ifs, like what if I don't do it? What if I get out there and I expose myself and I put myself on the line and I fail, right? What if I make that click live on that Facebook
Oh my God.
video and I fail and I fall flat on my face, right?
Oh, it happened. But I'm
Even
alive,
myself,
so
I mean,
know
I got nervous as hell the first time clicking it on. My voice was shaky and no, I don't give a fuck. I'll just turn on live without even having any thoughts formulated. But what we don't want, we will definitely live a life of quiet desperation if we do know what those things are and we let the fear of what ifs prevent us from going forward.
Right.
And so next week we're going to talk about fear setting. We're going to address that. And a lot of this, what we're going to address going forward is we're going to address what's the fear in front of you that's preventing you from taking the action. We're going to address what are these actual negative reoccurring behavioral patterns that keep knocking you off the path that you don't even know, right? Like maybe, you know, an easy example
you're not
is
bringing
like
awareness to.
Yeah, that you're not. Yeah, that maybe it's like I want to improve my health, but every time I go into it, I get so obsessive that it, and then in turn becomes unhealthy, right? So what are these kind of behavioral patterns in myself that get me on the far side of the yin and the yang, right? And I'm not in the middle, right? It gets me to, I try to go to the other side and I go too far.
You're unbalanced.
Unbalanced the other way, and I got to come back. So how can we address these things sooner so we can stay on that middle of the yin and the yang more consistently as we go down the path towards our aim? So we're going to address our own internal behaviors. We're going to address what happens when other people aren't meeting your expectations and how does that create these emotional responses, and dissecting and pinpointing those and having radical truth and transparency with those, and addressing them between your partners and your friends and your coworkers, right? Instead of acting one way and feeling a different way because of how somebody is treating you. We're going to also, I was on a roll. I had another thing.
Oh, well, that reminds me, we're also going to talk about blame. Like that kind of goes along with that too. Blame, how to also not just like put out the fires and constantly see problems. Just emotions and all of those aspects. I'm really excited. It's going to flow really well.
Oh, and then I was going to say, if we can do all these things, this helps best prepare us for what we brought it back to before, is the order and chaos of life that is inevitably going to happen to all of us. But if we can recognize what happens when other people aren't meeting our expectations, how we react, and how to negotiate that on an emotional level instead of just stewing in our fucking anger forever, or, you know, when chaos happens, how can I also not let my negative behavior patterns recoup themselves, right? Like life turns to stress and I go back to binge eating and overeating and I get away from this, right? Whatever it may be, right? What are these things that when chaos does happen, we resort back to the negative behavior patterns that keep the 10 making us to go back to where we were. So our goal is to say, hey, if we can understand in 10 points happier, here are our aims, and can we help you navigate getting there in a way that when momentum seems to be on your side, fortune seems to be on your side, you can move faster and there more efficiently because you understand how to negotiate yourself and others more efficiently. You're not letting fears prevent you from getting there, and you're really riding the high of a strong why of why you want to get there. And also, if we can have our fears pushing us forward, it makes it even stronger. And if we can do that, we'll move faster in times of order and fortune and momentum on our side. But then we'll also, when chaos does happen, we don't slide all the way back down the mountain that we started to make our way up. We can minimize our losses, try to make it net neutral. Like, hey, I didn't necessarily lose. I wasn't gaining, but I also didn't necessarily lose. So that's a win, right? So when I get out to the other side, I'm not clawing back to where I was before, right? I'm moving now. I can move forward again. So
well, we're not avoiding chaos. We're trying to spend less time and less severity in the chaotic state. And more time and more beneficial order for ourselves. Not going to avoid either one.
So aim, recapping, it's bigger than just goals. Most people live and pick goals on the external problem, right? I want to lose 30 pounds, right?
Mhm.
That's an external based problem. I want to fit into my jeans. Okay, that's still an external based problem, right?
Mhm.
We need to bring it down to the internal based problems and the philosophical problems,
Yep.
right? Like,
And how do we do that?
why?
Why?
Why do you want to lose the weight? Well, because I'll have more confidence, right? That's an internal problem. You're struggling with
Mhm.
feelings of lack of confidence. And you're like, well, why do you want to be more confident? Because if I could be more confident, then I could go out and maybe get that significant other that I want, that I also think is what I need to live a fulfilled life. So that's a philosophical problem, right? Like,
Yep.
and so we need to cut down those 3 layers to really get to, why is this thing a part of my identity and my beliefs and my values of who I am? And why if improving these things is going to get me in alignment with my identity, my values, and my beliefs, versus just, I want to look good to look good, right? Yep. So if we can do that, that why will be a lot stronger to guide you through the bullshit that's going to come at you in 2022.
Let's freaking go.
Let's fucking go. I can get deep, and then I can also get real broy real quick.
And that's why my mother says you're just like an onion. You have so many layers.
So many layers. Anything that we want to say? It's week 1 of 10 Points Happier. It's week 1 of 2022.
Yeah, I think it's just like, let's make this the year that we can start to know ourselves so that we can start to elevate the world around us.
Yeah.
And make that kind of be our guiding light this year.
For sure. Our emotional intelligence has not kept up with the pace of technology and the world. And because the world can provide so many answers, we don't ever have to actually take inventory of our emotions and decipher them and dissect them and see why they're causing. Because we just, hey, Google, why do I feel depressed?
I think it's like 2022 is the year of let's do something about it.
Yeah. That's why we're doing 10 Points Happier. Is we love fitness. Fitness is who we are. It'll be probably the main staple point of our business a lot.
Right.
But we also know we get so much feedback on the fitness side of things of like, man, my mentality and everything is so much better. I'm so much happier because we take into account all these things.
Yeah.
We take into account a deeper aim with fitness, right? It's always been like we've been using these techniques for a very one specific quadrant of the triad in our life, right? Just health, right?
Well, I think we notice that it's not necessarily a quadrant. It's like just this, like the lines bleed into one
once
another.
they're in, they really start to bleed, right?
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Like when people come into our program, the lines get blurry of
and
like,
I think for ourselves,
what are we working here?
For ourselves too. Like it's usually when one of those things starts to go haywire, lots of other things also start to go haywire.
But the main focal point is that we were targeting only specifically this, and these tools we were already using and finding a lot of success and the mentality improving. And so we said, hey, we're going to throw our hat in the rings and help people with just life.
Kaboom.
With 10 Points Happier. So knuckle up.
Good luck.
Yeah, we did it.
His first rendition, we'll definitely have to practice that.
Yep, for sure. All right, crew. Talk soon. Peace.